constitute about 28 to 35% of the marks together. 28 to about 35% of the marks. When you look at the taxation will run, let's say, for example, we say that should cost about, we can talk about maybe 60, this should be 65 to about 70% of the marks. 70% of the marks. So that this will basically constitute what we call public finance will take about 28 to 35% of the marks. Then when we talk about the taxation, it will constitute about 65 to, let's say, to 70 or 72% of the marks. But I want to reassure you, like, as we begin this class, that everybody is going to pass this paper. So without errors. And it's a very practical paper and a very enjoyable paper. If you're very keen, for those who are in accounting, it's one of the areas of specialization. And I want to echo that as we pursue what we are pursuing, that is in the intermediate level, that is the public finance and taxation. Even as you specialize on the advanced level, if somebody specializes in taxation, what I do in this level will be fundamental for you to carry out what you need to do in the advanced level of taxation. It will be very fundamental. It will be fundamental. So I expect you guys to be very keen and very attentive. In terms of analysis of this paper, when I look at this paper is about 50-50%. 50% calculation and 50%. This is 50%. This is a calculation. About maybe 50% and 50% theory. So if calculation is more, probably you have about 60% and 40%. That is, if calculation is more, you'll have about 60%, and the theory you have 40%. But I want to reassure you that at the end of this unit, there's nothing that will be tested, particularly in this paper, that I will have not taught you. Are we together? There's nothing that will be tested in this class that I would have not taught you. By the end of the day, as you face the exam, realize that you face exam, and what we've done and the prediction that we will be giving in this class, it will not be out. It will just be the same thing that I've taught you. That is the same thing that you are going to encounter in an exam. But particularly when you are introducing a concept, we start with the unit description. You know, what we need to expect. That is what's called the unit description. We call it the unit description. Again, in CPA, in all this unit, learners are basically equipped with a number of things. One of it is a knowledge. The first is what's called knowledge, skills, and what we call attitude. We have it as attitude. So three things that when you describe any unit, be it economics, they're supposed to equip you with knowledge, skills, and attitude. Are we together? To be able to apply, now this is to apply two things. Public finance management, we have what we call the public. We call it the public finance management. Public finance management principles. Public finance management principles. Public finance management principles. For those who work in the counties, and, you know, who want to know how basically the public finance, and even for those who are not working in the county, it's a very good area, public finance management. You'll be able to understand how the government operations basically work. How does government operation basically work out together? Then what we call public finance regulations. We'll also talk about public finance regulation. Public finance regulations. Most of the business are being done haphazardly. But you realize one of the biggest engine in all businesses are together. Take it easy, this is introduction. One of the biggest engine is money. Are we together? So we must agree that all of us, money without accountability, yes, even small businesses would be started on grounds that money is not, we don't focus on money. But you realize that what is the driving force? Individuals with money, people with money is contrary. It's always says, test a man with money and you'll know. Is it true? Evans, test a man with money, then you'll understand. So we'll be able to understand that how do we, what are the principles that we basically need to manage the finances in the public sector? We're also going to talk about public finance regulations. We are going to talk about the PFM Act, that is 2012, sorry. We're also going to touch on the Constitution altogether. Most of them, if you look at the Constitution, those will be like our small Bibles when we are talking about that is the public finance. They will be like our small Bible. Together on Tito, are we together? That is the first aspect in terms of skills and others. And I hope you're enjoying the class. Then on the taxation part, we call it non-complex. You'll be basically adding what's called non-complex tax computation, tax computation, tax computation, tax computation, and you're doing it for what they call for individuals, non-complex tax computation, that is basically for individuals, and what they call the corporates. Corporates are company. And I want to synthesize this. This class is very important. I wanted to skip it, but very important towards understanding what you intend to do. So Evans, the two Evans, when I say Evans, is all of you. I am speaking to the all class. So what you're going to do in the intermediate, you're going to do tax, but this one will be what they call non-complex. It will be general. I'm not going to teach you how we tax probably specialist company, how we tax the bank, how we tax insurance company, how we tax extraction companies, how we tax seas and air undertaking, how we tax, let's say, for example, how we carry out installment tax. But it will teach you a general concept, limited company in general. So you're not going to do specialized. So specialized will come for those who advance in taxation. And I believe all of you are going to enjoy it and probably advance in taxation. So that is what we call non-complex tax computation. That is at individual levels, but at the same time, we call it at corporate level. Corporate is limited company. Individuals, you're going to talk about how do we calculate pay. You're going to talk about how do we calculate pay, employment income. We shall be able to teach. And the calculation that I will be teaching, you realize that in exam, you will have those calculation. So that is what we call the unit description. Together, I hope that is at home. So then I proceed to what we call learning outcomes. My expectation for the learners at the end of the day, once I have taught these outcomes, that is what we call the learning outcomes. We call it the learning outcomes. Learning outcomes. And very important fundamental that we did talk about, even on the intermediate, on the foundation when we were meeting. Let's make the journey more important than all the things that come on our way. Let's make the journey more practical and more important. Let's focus on the journey. Let's not listen to noise, but let's listen to the journey and make sure that we are faithful to the journey. That is the most important thing as we partake of this class. So what do I expect by the end of this unit? By the end of covering PFT, this is what apply public finance management. A student should be able to apply what we call public finance. We call it management requirements. Apply what we call the public finance management requirements. You should be able to apply what we call public finance management requirement in practice. These are basically now non-complex. In practice, apply it in practice in non-complex environment. In what we call in non-complex environment. in what's called the non-complex environment. Public finance management principles. The principles, we say that when you give a man money, you must give a man money with control. Do we agree? Potato. That when a man is provided with money, that if you want to know the character of people, put money in front of them. You'll definitely know them. So again, to sort those issues pertaining to money, then we say that public finance basically envisioned, are we together? Basically envisioned that would have a number of things. When it comes to money, whoever came up with this, regulations that when the country came up with this, they basically noted that where money is, there's always a problem. And when you give people money, then it has to follow with what you call accountability. And therefore, that's why we need to have public finance management. So you should be able to apply what you call public finance management requirements in practice, but you're basically saying in non-complex environment. Then again, as a learning outcomes, what I expect, we have what we call compute taxes for various individual taxes, for what we call for various individuals, compute the taxes for various individuals and entity, and what we call entity. And I'm very specific. When I was talking about this, I was very, very specific. When it comes to individual, we're going to talk about employment income. How do we calculate pay? That is what we're going to do. When it comes to entity, we will just talk about companies in general, but you also talk about partnership altogether. You see the three forms of business. When you talk about business, the basically three forms of business. There's what we call the LTD company. There's what we call the sole trader, and there's what we call the partnership. So these are the areas that we intend to cover. Those are the areas that we intend to cover together. So those are the ones that you're going to calculate. Those are non-complex. You're not going to do specialist. If it's company, we are not going to talk about extraction company, but you're simply going to talk about company in general. If it's partnership, we are not going to talk about changes in partnership. We are simply going to talk about a simple partnership computation of tax. And if it's a sole trader, a simple computation of sole traders altogether. Then again, also apply tax loss. Apply what you call tax loss. Apply what you call tax loss. Apply tax loss for various. Applies tax loss in addressing. We call it addressing various tax issues. We call it tax issues. We basically apply what we call tax loss in addressing what we call various tax issues. Various tax issues. So when it comes to tax, be it, for example, issues to do with objection, be it to do with issues pertaining with the current times, there's a huge surge, what we call a huge surge. We call it a huge surge of what we call taxation cases. Are we in agreement? A huge surge of what we call the taxation cases. Are we in agreement? And so for you and the Evanses, you're the guys that the future is looking brighter for you, that you go to those tribunals. But what is the basis of solving those issues? You're not just need to solve those issues based on your own, but you have to understand the tax laws in order for you to solve. But I must also say that this is a huge market. This is a very, very huge market. Why is it a huge market? When you look at Kenya at the times that we have, in terms of practicability, tax is a very more practical concept. If you're very keen, tax is a very more practical complex concept that you can apply. But again, also the beauty of it is that not many people are in this field. Is it true? Not many people. And if there are, you'll find very, very few altogether. So this is an area that is viable in terms of application. At the same time, you should be able to file returns. There's a practical aspect that we can be able to handle at individual levels. How do we file tax? Undertake what we call, should be able to undertake, we say undertakes what we call non-complex. What we call the non-complex, you should be able to undertake what we call the non-complex. We call it the non-complex tax reviews. The non-complex tax reviews, what we call the non-complex tax review. So by the end of the course, that is my expectation for Ontito, and that is my expectation for Evans Onyango. Kindly could you confirm that you have the course outline? Kindly somebody to confirm that you people have the course outline. Perfect. I want to break the syllabus. Now we are breaking the syllabus. Systematically, we're breaking the syllabus or content, syllabus, we call it the syllabus to what we call the content. So when it comes to taxation, we basically have 13 topics. I say we have what we call 13 topics. We have 13 topics. So I break it down. Topic 1 to 6 basically touches on what's called the public finance. Topic 1 to 6 touches on public finance. Topic 1 to 6 will basically touch on what we call the public finance. Then as we proceed, we'll pick on topic 7 and topic 13. This will basically touch on taxation. That will simply touch on what we call the taxation. We are not teaching, we are simply breaking down the syllabus. Okay, we have not started downloading. We are just, we are simply, just walking through the course outline. We have not started. We are yet to start. We're just simply breaking. So if you look at topic 1 to topic 6, that basically touches on what we call the public finance. Then when we move to topic 7 to topic 13, that will be touching on taxation. But why is the catch? I want us to have this catch. When you have this, because there's always a trick behind every paper. That is, there's always a trick behind the paper. There's always a trick behind the paper. So this what we call the public finance. That is why most of the students, in terms of pass rate, and in terms of how students basically perform in the analysis, this one students don't perform very well. This one students don't perform very well. Is that noted? And why are they not performing well? Number one is because probably they're not taught. They say it's theory, so students to read. Are we together? And number two, I'll say probably students don't take note of theory. Students always think that theory is so easy. But when it comes to public finance and certain concepts in public finance, or certain questions if they come, there are specific answers to those questions. That is the trick. Some you can apply, but some will be very specific. Are we together? So how do I handle public finance? I normally teach the public finance, but what I do is I give the notes prior, but I teach it. As I run with the taxation, I also run with the public finance. So you realize that as I run with taxation, I will also be running with public finance. I start with topic 1. Maybe one Saturday, we start on one Saturday. I call in the morning and we run with the public finance. Because if those notes are not given, if those notes are not taught, probably they may not be helpful to you. Together. Perfect. Then I move to the taxation part of it. I move to the taxation. I move to what you call taxation. So when I proceed, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So when I move to the taxation, calculations don't work. Calculations will pay attention, but these calculations, there's a trick to them. Calculations is a trick to them. This calculation, I think there's a trick to them. You don't have to be perfect in order for you to score everything in these calculations. But Tito, you don't need to be perfect for you to score everything in this thing. Are we together? You don't have to be perfect in order for you to get everything. Are we together? So one of the things that I always like, of course, with the grace of God and and the blessings of God. We always say that whatever we confess, that's what we get. I always know that there will always not be a problem on taxation for my students. Those calculations, they will always not be a problem. And I believe my students will always be scoring all the marks when it comes to those calculations. That will constitute 50, maybe 50 to 60%. You should be able, because those calculations, you simply need to understand the trick, the trick. So let's have a walk down. Let's have a walk down. Just a minute. Sorry for that. Sorry for that interruption that we've had. So I've said that I went through the taxation. We have elements of calculation which constitute a lot of marks. Where there's a lot of marks is what we call the taxation part of it. That is where we have a lot of marks. But I've said that upon looking at that taxation, you realize that you don't have to be perfect for you to score everything in this particular area. And as we walk through it, you'll notice that you don't indeed have to be perfect in order to score everything. So let's walk through the first topic. The first topic is what's called introduction. We call it introduction. We call it introduction to what we call to public finance. We have the first one, which you call introduction to what we call to public finance. We call it the introduction to what we call public finance. We call it introduction to what we call public finance. So the first topic essentially, we just talk about it briefly, is introduction to public finance. So on the introduction to public finance, we define what we call what is public finance. What is public finance? That is basically the nature and scope of public finance, nature, and what's called the scope of what we call the public finance. So what we call the nature and scope of what we call public finance. What we call the nature and scope of what we call the public finance. Nature and scope of what we call the public finance. What we call the nature and scope of what we call public finance. Nature and scope of public finance. Nature and scope of what we call public finance. Nature and scope of what we call public finance. Nature and scope of public finance. So we'll also talk about sources of public finances altogether. Sources of what we call the public finances. Let me make it a bit interesting, although we don't need to spend a lot of time. Like, for example, national government. What is the sources of revenue for the national government? Are we together? What is the sources of revenue for the national government? The taxes that are there for the government. Like when you talk about income tax, counties do not collect income tax. Are we together on Tito? Counties do not collect what we call income taxes. For the company, for the counties, their sources are on property taxes. We have permits, property taxes, entertainment taxes. That is where the sources of taxes for the county basically comes from. Sources of taxes for the county, that is basically where they come from. That is basically where they come from. That is basically where they come from. Together. That is basically where they come from. That is basically where they come from. That is basically where they come from. When it comes to when it comes to what it call when it comes to when you talk about when it comes to the county, we know that their source of revenue, one of it is what? Is the property taxes. We have those permits and we have the entertainment taxes. But now the national revenue, when you talk about VAT, corporation taxes, withholding taxes, those are for the national government together. Are we together? Those are for the national government. But apart from taxes, we say that taxes will always constitute a huge percentage. When you start discussing per topic, it will be so deep that we will not even finish laying it down. But we can talk about it quickly. When you talk about a government, a huge chunk of government money, a huge chunk of what we call the government money, a huge chunk of what you call the government money basically comes from what you call the taxes. A huge chunk of what you call the government money basically comes from what you call the taxes. That a huge chunk of what you call government money basically comes from what you call the taxes. The number one source of government revenue basically is what you call the taxes. The number one source of the revenue for the government basically comes from what you call the taxes. A huge source of what you call government revenue basically comes from what you call the taxes. Respond with a yes if you're together. Basically comes from the taxes. Are we together? But apart from taxes, we normally say the government can decide to borrow. Are we together? The government can decide to borrow. But under public finance, I will also be teaching you what we call triple PPP. On teacher, have you heard of PPP? Public-private partnership. Yes, I will also teach you about public-private partnership, where government and public get into projects and they do it for efficiency. In order for government, you realize the public sector, are we together? Adani, yes, perfect. You realize that the public sector is very ineffective. Is it true? For those who are in the public sector, do you remember it's ineffective? The public sector is very ineffective. We must agree that the public sector is very ineffective. That's why you find people sleeping on their job. So the beauty of this PPP, that is a public-private partnership, is that the government may have what you call a leverage. The government may have what's called a leverage. The government may definitely have a leverage on what? Leverage on what you call a leverage on what you call leverage on what you call on private sector expertise. They can actually sink into expertise to make the project. When we'll be talking about joint venture, when you find there's a 50 partnership or what you call BOT, build, operate, then transfer. We can talk about BOLT, build, operate, then they transfer. Are we together? Then we have BOT, build, operate, lease, then transfer, But that is not its sources. Objective of public finance management. I'll talk about objectives of public finance management. Why do we need to manage the public finance effectively? I'll talk about the process, county budget. Are we together? Budget process. And this one, basically, when you talk about the budget process that is under topic 1, that was there in December. That was there in April, sorry. April 2024, 2025, the budget process was there. I remember I talked about the budget, and that budget, when I was telling them about the budget, that is the question that came. And I remember I insisted on students sending assignment. And you realize that when students were sending assignment, that is a question that outwardly came 10 marks was there. Then we talk about role of treasury and national treasury and county treasury. Role of county, national treasury, and county treasury. If you look at the AGAS exam, that question, I talked about it. Role of county treasury. What is the role of county treasury? That is so easy. County treasury inafanya nini? Kazi ya treasury inafanya nini? Formulate policies, macro and fiscal policies. Those policy, macro and fiscal policies that we're doing in economics, that you're basically doing in economics, is the role of the treasury to do that. Again, treasury, are we together? Treasury does what? Budget making, are we together? They basically draft the budget. They send the budget estimates, are we together? They send the budget estimate. They also have a mandate or a duty to make sure that the money that is allocated to various government organs are basically used effectively. That are basically used effectively. That are basically used effectively. They're basically used effectively. They are used effectively. They are used effectively. We respond with a yes. They are basically used effectively. They are basically used effectively. They are basically used effectively. Say they are basically used effectively. They are used effectively. They are basically used effectively. 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 So then number 2 is relationship between national and county government. That is topic 2. We call it the relationship between what we call the national and what we call the county government and the county government, the relationship between the national and what we call the county government, relationship between the national and the county government on budget and economic matters, on what we call on budget and what we call budget and economic matters. So what am I going to discuss under this? When I talk about national and county on what we call budget and economic matters. Can county take a loan without being county loans? How do county take loans? How do county take loans? Topic 2, I said relationship. We call it relationship between national and county government on budget and economic matters, on budget and what we call economic matters, on the budget and what we call economic matters, on the budget and what we call economic matters, on the budget and what we call economic matters. On the budget and what we call economic matters. On the budget and what we call economic matters. On the budget and economic matters. On the budget and what we call economic matters. So you see that loans from the counties are basically guaranteed by the national government. In order for counties to take a loan, they're normally guaranteed by who? By the national government. Do you know that? The loans for the counties are normally guaranteed by the national government. Are we together? Are we together? Are normally guaranteed by the national government. So revenue sharing. Under this, I'll talk about revenue sharing. Revenue sharing. And I want to make it a little bit interesting. How do they share revenue? How does county government basically share revenue? Share revenue with the national government. How do they share revenue with the national government? If you're very keen, how do they basically share revenue with the national government? How do they share revenue with the national government? How do they share revenue? If you have 100% of the revenue, I think now you'll be the scholars. Learning is very interesting. How I wish students would be dedicated. How I wish, Otito, is this public finance very interesting? What you're going to learn here will open your eyes. We are even going to talk about IFMIS, Integrated Financial Management System. It will open your eyes a lot. What you're going to learn in this place is going to assist you a lot. What you're going to learn here will go. You see, if a government raise, how do they share revenue? So number one, if a government, you say, it's normally less than 84, national government. What goes to the national government? National government, that should be about 84. We say less than 84 or less percent. It can be greater. It currently stands at 15%. 15%. This is to the camp. This will go to the counties. Evans, I want us to enjoy these things. This will definitely go to what you call to the county. Then we have a 0.5% that goes to what we call equalization fund. This one will go to equalization fund. Will go to the equalization fund. Will go to the equalization fund. Will go to what we call equalization fund. Will go to what we call equalization fund. Will go to what we call equalization fund. Equalization fund will definitely go to what we call equalization fund. I want to explain. Currently, county, about 15% of the revenue basically goes to the county. About 15% of the revenue will go to the county. But you're saying there's a provision that it can extend past 15. But now the national government takes a huge chunk, 84.5 less than, but they take about 84.5. Then 0.5 of the total revenue goes to what we call equalization fund. So what is equalization fund? I'll talk about what we call consolidated fund. I'll talk about contingency funds, and I will talk about equalization fund. This is an account that is basically the 0.5 of the revenue is there to boost. This is essentially there to boost